To my audio visual spectacular. Hi, this is Jim Dunagan, and today I want to talk to you about the history and uses of organizational orientations. I hope it will be enlightening and maybe even a little entertaining. Let's begin. Where do organizational orientation research, where does it begin? Well, it begins with a researcher named Robert Prestes, who about 60 years ago wrote an article where he theorized that organization members fit into one of three different types or categories: upwardly mobile, indifferent, and or ambivalent. A couple of years later, he wrote this book, The Organizational Society, where he really kind of elaborated on the characteristics of those three organizational orientations. So this is where the theory gets its start, and the research that was done is based on these theories, but well, there was at least one researcher who wasn't really that crazy about the research that had been done, and that's a guy named Robert Pruden. In 1973, he wrote that existing research on organizational orientations was fraught with ambiguity, controversy, and unsubstantiated empirical results. Wow, them some fighting words. So he went about this a little bit differently. He actually did a study. He got 150 American businessmen and examined them, and he found that their career and job attributes corresponded to Prestes's typologies. And this was a big step forward because this was what Pruden felt was real empirical research. He looked at people, he studied their characteristics, and he made the connection between their characteristics and these orientation typologies. And that's the way it stood for quite a while. The next big step in organizational orientation research was 30 years later, and it was done by a couple of West Virginia University professors named James McCroskey and Virginia Richmond, who developed the first quantitative scale to measure organizational orientations directly. Now, these two researchers are significant for a couple of reasons. One, they are probably the most prolific, renowned, and respected in all of communications research, giants really in their field. Okay. Also, a couple of SUNY Oswego professors, specifically the ones that run the Strategic Communications Master's Degree Program, they got their graduate degrees from University of West Virginia, and they studied with McCroskey and Richmond. Small world. So the study by McCroskey and Richmond, along with a couple of other graduate students, actually, Johnson and Smith, they wrote that Pruden's study was qualitative, and it measured orientations through observing individuals, but it didn't actually measure the observations. And that's what this quantitative study was going to be able to do. And the study was actually 4 studies. And it took 4 studies to actually get through the process of creating a valid and reliable scale that associated with job satisfaction and other communication orientations, and then connected it to personality variables of extroversion, neuroticism, and psychotism, often known as the big 3 personality traits. And this is kind of where the research has gone. And McCroskey and Richmond both did a lot of quantitative research. McCroskey, there are massive numbers of measures that he's done on various kinds of quantitative research. We talk about organizational orientations. What are we really talking about? Well, we did hear that they are one of 3 typologies or orientations. Okay, the first, upward mobile. The company man or the company woman, rule and procedure oriented. They have a strong connection or a strong affinity for organizations and their organization in particular. Next orientation is indifferent. Yeah, they work, but they're not a go-getter. They're not a company man or a company woman. They work to live. They do not live to work. Third orientation, kind of tricky, It's the ambivalent orientation. They don't adapt well to organizations. They don't like rules. They don't like authority. They're often frustrated. They often don't stay on the job for very long, and they often end up, at odds with management. Not a big surprise. So these orientations and the research that's been done about them, we're going to look at three different studies that examine organizational orientation in different ways. The first of the three is a study done by two researchers, one of whom is familiar, McCroskey, along with Goodboy, examining organizational orientation in something that's called Machiavellianism, to see if they can predict nonverbal immediacy and job satisfaction. Do you see that? When I said Machiavellianism, this guy's picture popped up. Weird, right? Well, the authors define Machiavellianism as strategically manipulating others for personal gain, often against the other's self-interest. Oh, so that's what Machiavellianism means. And there he is again. No coincidence, right? Maybe this guy fits this more now than he ever did before. Well, the authors hypothesized that employees that were high in Machiavellianism are more indifferent and ambivalent, with lower immediacy and lower job satisfaction. And once again, here he is. We discover from the results, after they tested employees from various organizations, that the results supported the hypothesis and provided more validation for that theoretical construct. So this research was really successful in that they looked at this characterization or this trait of Machiavellianism, and it's still applied, which is good when it comes to research. Next, we look at organizational orientation from a profit versus nonprofit organizational standpoint. Okay, and we've got a study. Hey, what do you know? McCroskey, and Richmond. Well, Jim McCroskey and Virginia Richmond, husband and wife, and the first McCroskey is their daughter. So it's a real family affair. Looking if organizational orientation theory applies to profit and nonprofit organizations. They argued that the research had been done previously on college students, so those mean ages really couldn't be presumed to be representative of workers in most organizations. So they used full-time employees from profit and nonprofit organizations, as well as from different organizational hierarchies. The results, again, they supported the reliability of the existing organizational orientation measures, which is, again, that's really important and really good. And they also found some significance in supervisor-subordinate relationships. And if you go back all the way to Pruden studied businessmen. And while that's interesting, we really know now that when we look at organizational orientation, we tend to want to look a little bit more at the employee. And the fact that there is some significance in that relationship kind of, in my way of thinking, kind of ties the two together. We kind of get the past and bring it up to the present a little bit. Okay, second article, this third article, I'm sorry, it's orientation in a school environment. And this study, look at that, Richmond and McCroskey again. These two work together a lot, obviously, along with a couple of other researchers examine organizational orientation and how it applies to a student's orientation of school environment. They hypothesized that organizational orientations do compare favorably with undergraduate school student perceptions of how they see their instructor traits and affects. Studied undergraduate students with measures that either were designed for students or modified as the organizational orientation measure was. The results? Well, they supported the hypothesis. Student behaviors very similar to employees. Orientations could be measured in the same way. And again, it provides additional validation. One interesting part of this study was it cited another study by a West Virginia doctoral student named K.S. Threet. Name seems vaguely familiar. And the study focused on instructor credibility and the ability to influence and persuade. I wonder. Well, we'll leave that for another day. In concluding, what we've learned about organizational orientations, a couple of three things I think are true. The theory has been tested under multiple conditions using different research methods. It's consistently found to be valid, which is really number one when it comes to research. Next, a valid and reliable quantitative method created back in 2004. So for 14 years, it's obtained quantitative data about the actual orientations, and it continues to be valid and reliable. Multiple studies using and adapting the quantitative organizational orientation measures was in each case found to be valid as well. So this is solid research that has been tested again and again and found to be valid, meaning that it says what it means to say, and it's reliable, means that it says the same thing over and over again, things that you'll learn as you get farther into research and research methods in our program. Well, thanks for taking the time to listen to me jabber on about organizational orientations, and I wish you good luck in your future endeavors. Just in case you were interested in what the research was and the references were. Bye-bye.